Hello and welcome to Reflections in Veterinary Education, or RIVE, the podcast. I don't know why I said it that way this time, but here we go. Welcome back, everyone. And Catherine, you are leading the show this time, correct?
Yes, I have the distinct pleasure of choosing a topic for this particular podcast. And I am just frustrated with a few things regarding the whole cheating situation with veterinary students. So I'm interested to get some different perspectives and put some things out there that I think. So I guess this all starts because I was having a conversation at a workshop that I was presenting. I'd been asked to talk to some folks down at Tuskegee about some teaching techniques. And one of the faculty who showed up, we were talking about assessment and testing. And she said to me, my colleagues are always so angry with me because whenever I give my students a test, then I give them their test back immediately afterwards. And I just write new test questions every time, so that I really want the students to learn from their mistakes. And I really want them to understand, where they were strong, where they needed to kind of do some review.
Yeah.
And my colleagues are really angry with me because they don't do that, because they don't want to have to rewrite test questions every time. And they say, well, these students, they're just going to save these exams and they're going to pass them down, and then they're just going to enable other people to cheat. And I kind of went on a little bit of a rant, and I said, well, so first of all, I think that's great that you're willing to give that information to your students and that you're transparent about it and that you're willing to put the effort in to write new questions every year, because how are students supposed to learn from their mistakes if they never actually get to sit down and review them and ask questions about them and kind of get that stuck in their brain somehow? And, I said, I will say that it can be very difficult to write new test questions every time that are really good. And I understand that too. So I understand from that perspective. And I said, but on the other hand, if you think about our profession, we are a collaborative profession, right? When I was in practice, especially as a first-year veterinarian, I had 7 other doctors that I could call. I had textbooks that I could use. I had the internet that I could access, so that if something came up and I couldn't access it in my brain, then I would ask someone else. And so I understand that there's a level of walk around knowledge each student needs to graduate with. Like, you need to know the general ranges for temperatures for the species that you're working on, the general normal ranges for things, right? Like, that it's all there, but there's a reason on blood work, for example, that there's a range, because you don't remember that all the time, nor should you have to. And so I said, one of my frustrations is that we are a collaborative, profession, but we teach our students in this, like, you have to know this by yourself. It's all this information. It's an overwhelming amount. The other thing that frustrates me about this is that the vast majority of our students don't cheat. And the vast majority of our students wouldn't cheat if given the opportunity.
Yeah. Now,
the vast majority might be 75%. It might be 92%. I don't know the hard numbers, but I can tell you that every year there's maybe 1 or 2 students who try to cheat.
Yeah.
But the way that we set up our exam system and our assessments are so high stress, because it's like, don't do this, don't bring your phone in, don't put your labels on your this, you can't do this, you can't do that. And we do that because we don't want students to cheat. And I'm like, why do we do that? Because honestly, the majority of students who are cheating at that level are going to get caught somewhere down the road. They're either going to get caught cheating, which we actually just had happen, or they're going to get through by cheating. And by the time they get to clerkships or the NAPLE or whatever, they get out, people are going to figure them out, right? And we're not going to catch all of them. I get that. And so I'm just curious what you all kind of think and feel about this, because I'm a little bit conflicted, because I do understand on the one hand why we do it, but on the other hand, I almost think that we've gone too far in the other direction.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw that out there.
Yeah. I'm conflicted on these as well. Like, even internally, sometimes I struggle with how I feel, like internally, I'm like, oh, I feel this way, but I also feel this way. Because it isn't that, I don't think it's that clear cut for me. And do I want to make sure, like, you obviously want the students to have integrity, and, you want them to be displaying that, and to want to be able to do this job well, right? Like, that's ultimately what I care about as an instructor, and in some ways as a gatekeeper, right? Like, if I am assessing the students and I am saying, you pass this course or you pass this clerkship, I am telling the public, right? Like, eventually this all gets accumulated and you get a DVM. That is me. I'm part of this community that has said to the public, I trust you that you can go out there and do a good job with somebody else's family member, right? Somebody's, livelihood. That I trust you and I'm part of that. And so I take that so seriously. And so that for me, there's a side of it to that. But I absolutely agree with, like, we're also here to educate them and to teach them. And there's a process. And it's not always clear. Really, the lights just went out in my office, whatever. It's not always clear that, like, what are the things they should be able to do completely on their own and work independently, and what should be walking around knowledge, and what are the things that I'm totally fine with them, collaborating on. And I'll share a story, an example of where I had like an issue with a class with not being. It's cheating essentially. And I think some of that was on me and not being as clear maybe with my instruction. So I had a course years ago, and a big thing for me is like drug calculations. You got to be able to do these. And I think it's really important that each and every one of them can do these calculations, because at some point you're going to be out in practice and somebody's going to ask you, hey, can you double check this for me? And I want you to be like, yes, and it's fine to say, hey, I'm not the greatest at this, but if we're both getting the same answer, we feel pretty good about it, but like you need to be able to do this stuff. So I gave them essentially a quiz. It was a take-home quiz. And I said, you can use any resources that you want except for a classmate. Because kind of like what you had talked about, Catherine, is like, you're going to have the internet, you're going to have this, but I'm giving them word problems, like you have stuff from a medical record and you have to figure this out. You can't, there's nothing that I have found. I don't know, maybe with the new AI, it's available, but that you put in a story math problem and it will solve it for you. If that happens, then I guess I change everything I do about drug calculations. But right now, you still have to figure out which pieces of data you need to pull from the medical record and all of that. So I say, you can use whatever resources you need online, this, that, and the other thing. Just don't work with each other, because I want you independently to be able to use those resources when you leave here, that you know how to use those resources. And so they had this, quiz on the learning management system. What they didn't know, and I didn't say, I didn't really feel like it was a big thing, but they all had the same types of questions, but like some of the numbers had changed. So they didn't all have the exact same questions. They also don't seem to realize that a lot of those learning management systems tell you how long they spend on an individual assignment. A lot of them didn't get that. So I had a student reach out to me and say, hey, I don't understand why I didn't do well on this quiz, this take-home quiz that they had a month for. And, sent me a picture of their work. And then I looked at their quiz and I said, because you were taking someone else's quiz. Very clearly had worked with someone else and answered. They didn't realize that everybody had different, slightly different questions. And so, yeah. This was the one thing I was like, you can use anything you want. You can use the internet. You can use textbooks. I had these instructional videos, all of these things. Just don't copy off of each other. I want you to be able to do it. And so then I was like, okay, so now I go back and I look at what other student, so I found there were a number of other students, anybody who missed questions. I'm like, was that the right answer to the wrong question? Because they were all random. And it turned out this was not the only student that had done this. And so I was just really upset by this because I felt like I was being pretty reasonable in giving them, and so I've had to reflect on that, over the years. It was a big thing. I went into the administration. I was like, what I need to do something about this. I ended up throwing out that assignment. But I also spoke to the entire class, had a meeting and got teary eyed. I had this, I wrote this letter to the administration. They're like, we think you should read this to the class. And it was this whole thing about how I need to feel confident when I pass you for a class that you can do these things, right? But I also have thought about it more over the years. I'm like, maybe my instructions weren't clear when giving them all this, latitude of all these other things. I thought I was, but because the student clearly wasn't thinking they were cheating either, right? Or that they were getting caught at it. I'm not really sure. It's hard to know. But they clearly didn't pay attention to the fact that their classmates' quiz was not the same as their, I don't know. So I struggle.
It's a sense of betrayal, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just also can you really do this? When you're like, yeah, we work together and it's great. And I'm like, but can you do this? If you don't have this this, crutch of somebody else, walking you through it. Can you still do this? And I now don't know that you can. And so it's hard. It's really, really hard.
Is that a bigger institutional problem? Is that a bigger educational problem of students are so desperately trying to keep their heads above water that when they are given the latitude to do that, they're going to take the easier path because they have so much else on their plate that they have to drink in. And I'm not excusing that behavior at all.
Yeah.
And I completely understand. I would have felt the same way, and I would have really struggled with that as well. But I do wonder, right? Because
for sure.
So much of our students, and it's too much. We legitimately ask too much for our students, because if we think back to even our education, I'm probably, I don't know, when did you graduate, Bobby? 2007?
Yeah.
Okay, so you graduated 2007. I graduated 2008. Eric, when did you graduate?
2000.
2000. Okay, so of the graduates in this podcast, you're the oldest of them. I'm the youngest of them, and even so, the amount of material that they now have to learn compared to what you and I and Bobby had to learn is, exponentially larger.
It keeps growing all the time. Yeah.
Right. But the time that they have to learn that is still the same that you and I had. And so I think that we've sort of created our own monster in many ways. And that's, part of the problem too. So I don't know. I struggle with this because I do get it. I do understand that there are things we want our students to be able to do. And we do need to know that our students have integrity and that they're going to be honest and trustworthy. But are we pushing them beyond the point? Because, so we've got this textbook coming out, right, that all of us have contributed to. And one of the chapters is on cheating. It talks about cheating. And, the research demonstrates that students cheat when they feel like they're unable to, they don't have the time to study. There's a high stakes situation involved. And there's a couple of other things, but you think about all of the reasons that students cheat, and our curricula feed into that.
It ticks all the boxes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every way we give them too much, they don't have enough time to study. They don't feel good about themselves.
Everything is high stakes.
Everything's high stakes.
They feel everything is high stakes. They're competing with their classmates. They're embarrassed. Like all of these things completely feed into this. And so, maybe it's short-sighted to say we need to do something about letting students having a little bit more leeway there. And maybe we really need to be talking about, the failures of our curriculum and how but I'm like, oh, we should just, an open book and students can talk to each other. And then on the next day, I'm like, but, they still need to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And
no, it's totally true. And the thing was, like, my initial reaction to that scenario was, I think you hit the nail on the head, Eric, it was like betrayal. I felt really hurt. I really did. I was so disappointed. It was like when I was a kid and my mom, like, rather than slapping me, she was like, I'm just disappointed. You're like, no, I felt disappointed. And I was just like this, but what I did, like in the next couple of years, I changed the way I present. I go, this was clearly not presented in a way that they felt like it didn't feel, I didn't hit the right notes as far as how important it is, but also I wanted it to be, so I actually made it lower stakes in the future, right? Like, so that was kind of in line with what you're saying, Catherine, like adjusting, like to say, you guys, I didn't want this to be this thing that you were stressing about. This was meant to be, you have a month to do this. You have all these resources, make sure, that you know how to do it. And here's all the ways to help you. But that's not how they took it. And so I had to change the way I approached it, like after some reflection of, rather than being like, the students, kids these days, they don't care about, you go through that initially. And then you go, well, maybe I need to be doing something different. So I think that's, for me, the more important take home for me in that scenario was, okay, yes, you're going to be upset. That is disappointing. But what was I doing to contribute to the conditions that led to those kind of behaviors? Because I don't think that, like you said, it's not like all of our students are coming in and they're like, just how am I going to cheat on the next exam? Like that's not what they're doing. They're feeling that pressure, and they don't always make the best choices. And who hasn't made a dumb choice when you were in a bad situation before? So I think it's important to talk about it from both perspectives.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this is in my opinion, one of the arguments for going pass fail.
Mm-hmm.
Like get all these high stakes assessments out, or go to a mechanism where they can retake assessments, and teach growth mindset. And it's like, it's okay if you don't get it the first time, you guys, come back tomorrow,
It's
Try
actually
it
one of the
again.
things I love about pass fail is that I can be like, I write these things because you're not going to know all the answers. And I need you to start getting used to that. Like you need to start getting comfortable with that. No, it's really important for me. I'm like, you can't know it all. You can't possibly, and I need you to start getting comfortable with that because you will not. None of us do. Like we just, there's too much to know and new stuff coming out all the time that you're going to be wrong. And also you're going to do everything right and you're going to fail. Yeah. Like that's going to happen in medicine. Yeah. You're going to do everything right and fail, and your patient's going to die, or you're going to do everything wrong and it's going to live. And you need to start getting comfortable that this isn't how medicine works anymore. It's not like passing an exam. And so
I think that whole growth mindset comment, Eric, is really important. And I know it's sort of like a catchphrase now. Carol Dweck's made it this sort of catchphrase, but have you seen the original TED talk that she did about growth mindset and sort of what got her on that path of why she wanted to investigate it?
I can't remember.
So it was really interesting. It's actually the only thing I remember from the 14-minute thing, but she talks at the very beginning about one of the reasons that she got interested in it is because she was sort of trying to figure out what she was going to do next. And she went to a New York high school that was, I don't know if it was some type of magnet school. I don't know if it was a STEM school or, art school or whatever. And she said she was talking to the teachers, and somehow in the course of those conversations, they started talking about how those students were graded. And one of the teachers indicated that they don't have any students fail. And Carol was like, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean none of your students fail? And she's like, we don't have failing grades at this high school. She's like, okay, well, what do you have then? She's like, we have pass and not yet. And not yet means, you tried really hard. You're not quite there yet. We're going to give you an opportunity to figure out how to get there. And we're going to support you in that process. And they found, and that was like sort of what started her on this career of, okay, how do we get students to be in a growth mindset? And she said, that has stuck with her, and that sticks with me. Cool. So I'm thinking like, maybe we don't have a pass fail curriculum. Maybe we have a pass not yet curriculum, right? Where maybe they're just not quite ready in surgery, or they're not quite ready on ECC rotation, or they're not quite ready to do whatever. But with a little bit of help and with a little bit of additional support, we can get them there. And it's really a great way to help students understand that. And I mean, I go back and forth on that too, because failure is important, right? People need to fail at things so that they can figure out how they're up. But I love this idea in veterinary medicine that we say not yet, because every student that comes through our walls is capable of doing.
Yeah. Well, so that I would give a little bit of pushback, and that would be my only concern about not yet, is that I think there are some students that aren't able to finish the curriculum. And if we have this paradigm of not yet, it's like, okay, not yet, so you're going to spend 10 years retaking courses because you've always wanted to be a vet,
I think I agree with that. I think there's a way to probably mitigate that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a strict not yet,
because we have those now. Right?
Yeah, right.
But I mean, that also speaks to this idea of this failure to fail students too, right? And there's just too many people who don't do the things that you do as clinicians and sit there and say, well, here's my bar, right? And let's face it, that's a pretty low bar, right? Like if you're willing to send a student if you're willing to send your healthy pet, your relatively or otherwise healthy pet to a student, and you would trust them in that. I mean, that's actually a really low bar.
It's a super low bar. Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that there are people who don't have a bar at all. And so they will never fail a student because it's just this whole, they've made it through 3 years or 3.5 years. And it's just,
it's just going to be too hard. Like all the hoops I'm going to have to jump through to actually fail a student is hard.
Right. Yeah. So point taken, Eric, on that. Yeah. But I wonder in the first, at least parts of I don't know if that's maybe a clinical curriculum thing where it's like, okay, you have up to 18 months of, potential opportunities to remediate and not yet, but you don't have a chance to. Yeah.
I think you have failure and still have a growth mindset though.
Yeah. Right? No, I agree.
I don't think these are mutually exclusive. And I do, here's one thing I think our students struggle a whole lot with is they get to, vet school and they're in their early 20s, most of them, and they've been going their whole life not in a system that is promoting a growth mindset. So I love the idea that you have a high school, and if we can start this in, elementary and middle school, but and this is why I push it so hard, because so many of them have been, you cannot fail, you cannot fail, you cannot fail. And they've been taught that, right? Like some of them have had, different supports and been encouraged to embrace mistakes and things like that, but not the majority, I would say. And, in order to get into vet school, and they've had, all this, these goals all our lives, and, we have to be in the top of this, top of that. And so we do that to get into vet school. And then we get into vet school and somebody like me comes along and is like, yeah, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to kill patients. And they're just like, what are you talking about? I don't know. That's not a thing. And so it's a really jarring transition for a lot of them.
I think it's a jarring, but I think the other thing is that a lot of our students are not allowed to, it's not even that they're not allowed to fail, it's they're never told that they do fail, right? It's this era of everybody gets an award. So you have 8 people in a race, but everybody gets an award. Nobody's a loser. And I'm sorry, sometimes you're a loser. Yeah. And sometimes you fail, and it's not about
saying nobody's a loser, saying it's okay to not be the best at this. Yeah.
Well, right. Yeah. Or just to say, sometimes you're a loser. Sometimes I'm a loser. Sometimes I lose things, right? Not that I'm but just like sometimes I'm not the best, and I'm not even close to the best. And I think a lot of our students have never been told that in their lives, because they've been given an award for everything. And then when they get to that point where they can't handle it, they do turn to cheating. They are so stressed out because they're like, what do I do to make sure I stay at the top, to make sure that I still get my ribbon? And that is the overriding sentiment, instead of, okay, I've reached a challenge that I don't know how to get over. What do I do to figure out how to get over, around, or under it?
It's that avoidance. Yeah. So one of the comments I had from a student that year with the drug calculator, it was a mess. I've improved since then. But one of the comments I got from the students at the end of the year was that because they had multiple, this was the next year. This was the next year. I changed up how I did the drug calculations. They now had like 4 different opportunities to do this throughout the year. And so the quiz was, they had like a quiz, whatever. But they could take it 4 or 5 times, and the highest grade they got was the one that they kept. So if they got 100% the first one, they're done. And so I thought this was pretty good. This also, it was okay, but not it. It took me a lot of years to figure out drug calculations and how to teach them. Anyway, but this year a student, was giving feedback on the course, and they struggled with the drug calculations, and it was a huge stress for them. The very first quiz they took that was hard, and I told them it was going to be hard, they failed. They got like 0% or 1 or something like that. And then they were like, it was so stressful that they were like, I can't do this. And so I'm going to avoid it. I'm not going to try. I have all semester. And it's that, it's that fixed mindset is I'm going to bury my head in the sand and pretend like this isn't a thing, put it off, even though I had the entire semester and so many opportunities. I was like, here's these study sessions, here's my office hours, all these things, right? I'm sitting there thinking I'm being amazing and offering all this stuff. And the students just like, I shut down after that first quiz. And so that was another reminder for me that we need to encourage that. And like, we got to drag them along sometimes when it comes to the growth mindset, because that's not the natural state for a lot of them.
So what you said there, that you've gotten better, just makes me remember for probably the first, 10 years I was a faculty member, I was very keen about being preventative for cheating. Like I would walk around during exams, and like I would, scrutinize the things that people turned in and like compare them with their others. And I still some ways believe that is important, except that it assumes a certain educational paradigm, which is that the students are an island and they need to do it on their own, and they don't have access to the whole of human knowledge in their pocket. Yeah. And that's just not how it is anymore. So I do wonder how much of it is a newer educator phenomenon, right? Like it would be interesting to collect attitudes on people like in their first 5 years teaching versus after they've been teaching for 10 or 15, 20 years, and like see if that evolves.
I see. So you mean just early career educators are like, everybody's going to cheat and I got to stay on top of it. And after a while, you're like, I need to calm down.
That cheating is important. And, because I think like you guys, I'm like, on the one hand, I do not want cheaters to be around. Like, I think they should be punished, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, I'm like, all of my exams are open book, open note, work with who you want, because that's reality,
Exactly.
Well, and then what is cheating, right? What is what is collaboration versus what is cheating? Because if you're allowed to collaborate with somebody and talk to somebody, then it's collaboration. But if you're not allowed to do it and you still do it, then it's cheating. And that could be also really confusing to students, right?
Yeah.
And I think we do send a lot of messages to our students, particularly in a professional program. And I mean, also understanding that neurologically, most of them are not adults when they enter the program. And many of them are not adults when they leave the program. I mean, you really don't attain neurological.
Well, still aren't,
25 or 26 or whatever. Yes, many of us still are children of what we want to do with our lives. And so you have that too. But I think there is that confusion in people's brains, right? Like, well, they told me that I could work with my friend on this one. So how is that different than, taking an exam and working with my friend on an exam? Because in their mind,
except that the ones that I've seen happen here, they obfuscated it in such a way that they knew it was wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I they do know that it's wrong. I'm not saying that they don't know that it's wrong, but I do think that there is a level
justify it to themselves.
Yeah, right. I mean, we had an incident just recently with one of our students who was very clearly cheating and will be likely punished for it and potentially kicked out of the program for it. And and on the one hand, it's like, okay, well, that's good because we don't want people who don't have integrity. But on the other hand, I know this particular student has had, some challenges going on in the personal life and has had some recently diagnosed learning disabilities and is sort of struggling with that. And you take high achieving students and put them in a high stress situation and they have a fear of failure. Some of them are going to do whatever they can to do what they think is going to allow them to survive.
Well, and I think that some of them are, like you said, those mixed messages. They could say, okay, yeah, well, Dr. Hoffmeister isn't letting us do that, but he's being unreasonable because when we get out into practice, we're going to be able to talk to each other, which is why Dr. Fogelberg lets us do open, and so even though they know it's wrong and they try to hide it, they have justified it in their minds saying, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm breaking, I'm sometimes like, you're like, certain rules need to be broken, right? Like I'm that way as well. I mean, I'm not encouraging people to cheat. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean is we all have done that in our minds. We're like, oh, that rule is stupid. Like who's never sped, and been like, like there's nobody around. It's super safe. I can go faster than the speed. Like we all justify breaking rules now and again. And we say, I'm still a good person. So like, I think sometimes that's what's happening. Especially I think when you're saying we're sending those mixed messages, we're giving them, kind of, this is how you can justify to yourself that what you're doing is okay. And so it's just messy.
It is. Messy.
How much do you all think that there is sometimes a family component to this? Because that's the most recent one that I was involved in is like, the person's family is like, you have to be a vet. This is the most important thing you can possibly do in your life. And that at least that was one of my suppositions as to why that kind of pushed them
external
in that
pressure.
direction. Yeah.
I don't know. I imagine that fear of letting others down or being perceived as failing is a big issue, especially when you're talking about fixed mindset, right? So there, if you looking at some of the research on that, there's, is it that I am afraid of being wrong, or is that I'm afraid of being perceived as being wrong or making mistakes? Some people are okay, like making mistakes if no one else knows about it. But if other people think that, I'm not going to answer in class because if I'm not 100% sure that I'm right, I embarrass myself kind of thing. So sometimes like, do I want to show people that I'm good at something, or do I actually want to be good at something? So I do think there's absolutely a component of that for a lot of our students, and that
like a social pressure.
Yeah. And but is some of that coming from family? Very likely. Absolutely.
I agree with that. And I would say, just from my own experience as a veterinary student, and I say this in all sincerity, I literally tried to quit vet school every year that I was in vet school, including my clinical year before I started. I hated vet school. I truly hated vet school most of the time. And part of that was because of the high stress, high pressure situation. Part of that was because I was going through my own personal issues, and I went to vet school for a lot of the wrong reasons. But in the end, I I didn't cheat my way through vet school. Clearly, I had a 2.4 GPA my first year. Did not cheat, but
or you just didn't cheat well.
or I didn't cheat well, or I cheated well enough, right?
Yeah, there you go.
But the point being that my desire to not fail out did not override my desire to be an ethical person and be able to look at myself in the face every morning and say, you didn't cheat your way through this. And but then there was also this idea of like, well, I don't want to fail out. If I choose to leave that school, it's because I choose to leave that school, not because I failed out of that school, right? And so there were some competing things. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you and look you in the face and say I wasn't tempted at points in my vet school career to be like, okay, it would just be so much easier if I cheated. I did not. So I can see how somebody who has, I can see how students struggle with that. 100%.
That dichotomy between like, if I'm going to, rather than failing out, I'd rather it was my choice to leave, like I chose. Yeah. I mean, that's the same kind of thing. That's so interesting. So I can't tell you why this was. So I went like, I was an overachiever. It was like, I'm going to, get A's on everything. I'm a very competitive person. But when I got to vet school, for me, like getting into vet school at the time, I thought like that was it. That was that was the hardest thing I've ever done, was getting into vet school. And so the approach I took in vet school was, I want to learn this stuff. Like I was excited about it. So I had the opposite. I loved vet school. I loved all the stuff we were learning. I was so nerdy about it. And for whatever reason, I had a growth mindset at the time. I can't tell you why I did. I don't know if it was from sports and like playing softball, where like if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you're nailing it. But I very much was just like, I don't care if I didn't get an A on the exam, because like if they're asking me minutia, I want to understand this. And so that worked really well for me, because I was able to prioritize the things that were most important to me. And I'm grateful for that. But yeah, it was because I didn't have aspirations to go beyond. What's that?
Yeah. So I did that as well.
Yeah.
I was 31 when I started that school. So I had an entire career. And I think is actually probably what ended leading me to the career that I'm in now, and the position that I'm in now, was the lack of ability of my instructors to understand what was going on. Right. So, I wanted to learn the material. It wasn't that I didn't want to learn the material. The reason I had a miserable experience in vet school is because the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of my faculty did not understand education, and they did not understand teaching. And so like, I remember like radiology was a pivotal class for me. It was our second year radiology class. I had failed the first exam. I had gotten a solid D on the second exam. We had one exam left, and I knew I had to get like an 88% on this exam for me to pass this class. Right. And I was studying, I was doing all the things. I wanted to understand the material. And so I went in and I talked to my primary instructor, and I said, Dr. X, I really want to learn this material. I'm really struggling with it. Can you help me understand why I'm struggling with it so much? And he said, well, are you memorizing your notes? And I remember this clear as day. Are you memorizing your notes? Well, no, I'm not memorizing my notes. I want to learn the material. He's like, well, you learn the material as you memorize your notes. And I looked at him and I said to him, with all due respect, I have a master's degree in education. Memorization is not the same thing as learning. I would like to learn the material. And he stopped and he looked at me and he said, memorization is the first step in learning. And I was like, okay, thanks. And I just walked up. There was not going to be any headway there. Yeah. So then I went to my friends who were doing pretty well, and they helped me. And then I went to another radiology instructor who took the time to read, and this was back, like I was the last class that read plain films with me for an hour a week for 6 weeks. And finally looked at me and said, Catherine, I don't know why you're failing radiology, because you're reading films better than my 4th year students. And what ended up happening was, it was the tests. It was the way the tests were created. And those tests, so we would literally go into a room, all 127 of us would sit in a dark room with a big screen. And if you had a bad seat, you didn't have a great view. And we had like 30 seconds to look at a radiograph that they would project on the screen. And then we would have questions that would be related to that particular radiograph. Sometimes it would be 1 question, sometimes it would be 3 questions. But literally some of the questions were like, you know, you've just seen an abdominal radiograph of a dog, right? That presents on emergency service. And it would give like Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 that were potential differential diagnoses. And then the question would be, which of the following is true? 1 only, 2 only, 1 and 2 only, 3 only, 4, 5, and 6.
Wow.
Didn't do well on that exam because that's not asking you what to know. That's asking you to do a freaking logic puzzle, you know?
Yeah.
And so I did ultimately have friends who helped me and I passed, but our instructors don't help us in those situations, right? And so I spent my entire, and I still sort of suffer from this feeling like the dumbest person in the room. But then I went to clinical rotations and I was fantastic. And I had, you know, my clinicians were like, oh man, you must be at the top of the class. I'm like, yeah. So there's a huge disconnect there for me. And so I think as instructors, we've got to figure out how to.
Yeah.
So
I wonder if part of the reason you had such a crummy experience was because you knew so much about education. I went in, I didn't know crap about good education. And so I was like, this is what I've been getting for, 20 years.
Oh, I knew our neuroscience prof was rubbish. So thinking about instructors, I see instructors spend a lot of energy to prevent cheating.
Yes.
And in so much so that I'm like, what if you redirected that energy somewhere else?
Or what if you wrote your questions in a way that would be really difficult for students to cheat without you knowing it?
Yeah.
I love the redirect the energy that you're talking about, because this is what I say about like some of the, if you can go online and find like the elaborate ways that people cheat. And I'm like, man, if somebody would just take that energy and put it into studying,
I know.
like the parallel there is awesome.
Yeah.
If the instructors would just like take some of that energy to prevent cheating into their instruction, maybe nobody would think they had to cheat.
So true. I mean, when I was teaching public health students, all of their, much like Eric, all of their questions were open note questions, right? Not open note, but open textbook questions. Mm-hmm. And I would tell the students every year, I would be like, listen, you have open booked exams in this course. And the reason you have open book exams in this course is because I don't expect you to remember the minutia. And I'm not going to ask you what the third word of the fourth paragraph on page 256 is. That's not why you're here. You're here to understand concepts and you'll be able to apply them. So I may ask you a question, and there were all essay questions. And I granted, when you have 125 students, you can't always do that, but they were either short answer or essay questions. And it was things like, explain to me how the interactions in the epidemiological triangle will affect, population health in a developing nation. So they could look up what the epidemiological triangle was. And I didn't care whether they looked that up or not. What I needed them to know was to figure out, it's just a triangle, right? Literally, that talks about environment, vector, and all that kind of stuff. But what they needed to know is, okay, so I know what the epidemiological triangle is. I know what it's telling me, which is not explained very well. And then I know how to translate that into my everyday practice. And so I would tell them, I'm like, listen, you can use your book as a reference material, but the fact of the matter is that 10% of the questions are going to come directly out of the book because they're just sort of meatball questions. But 90% of those questions, if you don't understand those concepts, your book is not going to help you.
Right.
And the students for the first test didn't believe me, and you would see them rapidly sort of thumbing through their books, trying to find the answers, and then they would give up because they knew that, okay, she didn't lie to us, right? She's not asking us that stuff. She's asking us the important things. And so, yeah, Eric, your idea of like redirect your energies into ways that are gonna naturally prevent cheating, but also support students in a way that helps really apply and synthesize and understand the material. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? But again, systemic, where we 125 students.
Because I don't do open book exams for the students. And the reason that I've decided that is because I think the exams are another opportunity for that long-term learning, right? Like if they have to pull it back and actually, like this is the testing effect, right? Yeah. So having to retrieve it is part of that. But I also this is another reason I like pass fail. Like you don't have to get a 99%. Like you just have to do well enough. But I'm still not asking him minutia, right? I'm asking, explain your thought process and why you would, so I give them, it's a clinical course. It's in the third year. So they know a lot of the stuff they need to already before they come to my course. I give them a clinical scenario. What would you do? And justify it. And they're getting graded on their justification because what I care about is their thought process. Now they are going to have to pull some, information from there, but I want them that process of retrieving the information. So I've made the conscious decision not to do open book for that reason, but I'm also writing my exams in a way that I'm not asking them the minutia. Like, I don't care about that. I'm asking, what are you going to do in this scenario? That's what I want to know. And you have that in your head if you understand the concepts. Because again, on the exam, you're not going to look it up in a book or in your notes and suddenly understand the concept. That's what I want you to focus your time and attention on. And the same thing, they don't really believe it for the first exam, but they do for the second one. And they do so well. Like I'm grading the exams, and it turns out you can do essay exams for 120 students. It just takes a long time to grade.
You can.
The middle of it right now. But I love it because I'm reading their responses. I'm like, yeah, they are getting, and they're not all answering the same way.
Right.
Because this isn't the only class they've gotten this material from. They're building all sorts of things, but they're putting it all together. And it's just really gratifying to see. I just wanted to provide the other perspective of it doesn't have to be open book to I think still prevent, the ability for cheating to even be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, I'm curious because I know you teach do you still teach your cardiology class in the second year?
I still do lectures, but I'm not the course coordinator.
Okay. I was just curious because I think, at least for me, it seems like it's more prevalent, and maybe this is just Virginia, I don't know, but it seems more prevalent where students are more apt to cheat in the first 2 years versus the third year. So I'm just curious as what your experience is. And
it is like Bobby was saying, that transition from we're taking you from memorizing all of this useless stuff that you have to get perfect in order to get into vet school. And then we tell you, no, don't do that. Just focus on learning to be a good clinician. So I think that probably contributes to it. I think that there's also probably a lot of mixed messaging, especially in the first couple of years, where like if you have a clinician in a basic science class, they're telling them like, look, you guys need to be able to like do this. Whereas the basic scientists are like, oh, you just need to memorize these things. That maybe all the basic scientists are a little, let's say like, but I don't know, like the focus on memorization in the first couple of years and most traditional programs just kills me. And I think that feeds into that cheating thing, because it's facts, and you can't design a test like Bobby's talking about, or you're talking about.
No, like to have an anatomy, but like I wonder about some of that too. I think about like anatomy, which feels like initially it's like, well, clearly you just have to memorize that, but I'm like, but do you like can you do think maybe we can come with some other ways? Like, is that really what? Has a surgeon ever saved a life because they could name the origin and insertions from a bone? Like, has that saved any life ever?
Yeah. Is it walk around knowledge? Cool if
you remember that stuff, but like I've gotten most of it, and I still managed to do okay by saving, saving a patient's life. I don't know.
I pick on anatomy a lot because that's one of the sort of places that really is. I think it's a really easy place to kind of talk about that whole memorization, that brute force memorization. Parasitology is probably another place that you can kind of pick on, and I particularly disliked anatomy. So I pick on it, and I agree, right? Like for me, anatomy was a chore, and it was something that helped me learn the language and the medical terminology, but it didn't help me understand medicine in the sense that it made things come together. And I think that you can do that with anatomy.
I agree.
Like you're talking about applied anatomy, you're talking about functional anatomy, you're talking about figuring out how to like problem solve in your head and like you do with neurology, like localize the lesion, right? Localize the problem, the pathology. But that's not how anatomy is traditionally taught. And I've argued for many, many years. Like I still remember like one of our anatomists in vet school was like, you need to be able to know every os and every tubercle and every ridge, because if somebody brings you a femur bone, you need to be able to tell what kind of bone that is and from what kind of animal and like from which leg. Is the right leg? And I'm like, okay, here's the thing.
What scenario is this?
Yeah, what scenario is that ever going to happen? Number one. Number two, somebody brings me the bone of an animal, I'm going to ask what the rest of the animal is, because I'm going to have a point of reference.
Wow,
right?
that's brave of you. I would just be like, nope, calling the cops. You sound like a sociopath. Why are you
Right?
random?
I'm sorry, that's not a justification. That's not a justification. Like, do I need to understand?
Oh no,
what
it is an
Does that
absolute,
happen to
it's
anyone else?
absolutely a justification, right? Like they need to justify why they're teaching it that way.
Yeah, but it's not a legitimate justification,
No.
right?
I've
Like,
yet
I'm
to
not
have that
an
happen.
osteologist. I don't care. And then I did have somebody come along and say, well, but it might be important if you're looking at radiographs and it's not marked. And I'm like, oh, I'm spending my time looking at every tubercle and looking at every this and that. I'm going to call up the I'm going to call the person who did the radiograph or talk to the technician and say, what side of this, what side of the.
But I think you can know the information and not necessarily have memorized the names of them, right? Like I think you can understand the concept of how muscles and tendons and ligaments interact with the bones and how that works. I think that's the stuff I want to understand is, okay, well, how am I going to use this to watch a patient's gait and figure out where the problem is, right? Like this,
Right.
I want to understand why this is important, not memorize the names of the things.
Well, and do I need to know every single branch of the peroneal nerve and what it innervates? No, I need to know there and it's important and don't cut it, right?
And if I ever do end up needing that, it turns out we have these things called textbooks. And now it's even easier, right? Like I understand that, I did not have a phone in the palm of my hand to have all the answers when I was in school. Like I get that, but we did have textbooks that we could refer to in those situations. Those still existed. And so it's like, if that's ever something that is crucial for me to know, like I'll be able to go and look that up at the time. Like, like you said, that's not, oh my gosh, if we don't sort this out right now in the next 3 seconds, this animal is going to perish. Like that doesn't happen. And also the bone you brought me, that patient's already lost the bone. Like we have.
I'm gonna bring us back on cheating because I feel like we ventured off to ranting, which is fine.
Us? No.
We all agree. The problem is we all agree, so it's like
You're right. I actually think cheating is a good thing.
No, so on that point though, because we all feel conflicted about it, right? We're all like, like on the one hand, on the other hand. So on the one hand, I do a grad student class for the residents to teach them stats, and I've used the same exams for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, you know what? If they get last year's exams and look at the answer and do that, like, it's not that I don't care, but I'm like, you're the one who wants to freaking learn stats,
Right.
like don't come to me and then cheat on you're totally cheating yourself. And so like, is that like, are we like, okay, well, they're cheating themselves, it'll catch up with them,
at some point. Yeah.
And I would say, and I appreciate you bringing us back, and I think I would have brought us back around eventually with the anatomy talk, which is we do expect them to learn every os and tubercle and everything like that, but why, right? Number one, why? And number two, if we can't give them a reason for it, then are we really giving them a reason then to cheat? Because if there's no reason for them to learn this material that's really applicable for them, they're probably more likely to cheat on it because
it's easier to justify.
It's a justification.
Wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if there was one class that I was tempted to cheat in the most, it was anatomy. Honestly, so you're sitting on a lab exam and your buddy's sitting right next to you and you're like, I don't know what that is. That's not my dog. I don't remember what that is. And you're like, oh, there's so much in there that doesn't feel as if it's going to help you. And I think if it was taught in a way that made you feel like it was going to help you, then you'd probably be less likely to cheat. I may be wrong.
No, I think you're spot on.
And that actually makes me think about the stat scores, because like the grad students are like, oh, thank God, like it's actually makes sense. And now we can understand the stats paragraph of these papers that we're reading. Mm-hmm. And so it's highly meaningful to them.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's part of the problem, is that we're teaching them stuff that they don't see the meaning of.
Yeah. So we need to either spend some time explaining why this is meaningful and why you should care. And then they put value on it and they go, well, then I don't want to cheat because I need to know this. And they've explained very clearly why this is important for me to understand, which is the track I've tried to move into with the drug calculations, right? Is like, here are the scenarios, like here are the real scenarios why you need to know this. Now, some of them may not be convinced, but again, I'm trying to do my best to say this is important because they do want to they want to be able to do this. I don't know. I don't believe I've ever had a student, again, not saying that I've never had any that have cheated, definitely have, but that they were just like, yeah, like this is my whole plan is to get through vet school, not learn anything and just fake my way through. Like nobody has that as their goal. If you did, you'd pick a more lucrative career, right? Like if you're going to cheat your way through something, pick something and make more money at it.
Law school or being an MBA.
Right. Exactly. Something where you could make some money. So, which I think law school is probably.
And actually, isn't there, I thought that I read sometime in the past decade that like people that go into investment banking have like horrible moral, you know, like on some grade, you know, it's like, oh yeah, no.
Yeah. I mean, seriously. And that sort of leads to this idea of we've been hearing, I hear everywhere I go, you know, students don't want to show up to class or they're just lazy. They don't want to work hard. And I'm like, no, that's not true.
You're not giving them a reason to come to class.
Yeah.
Say, number one, give them a reason to come to class. Number two, they wouldn't be in vet school if they were lazy and they didn't want to learn, right? Like nobody comes into vet school thinking, like Bobby said, like, oh, I'm just going to cheat my way through. This is going to be super easy. And then I'm going to get out and I'm going to kill all kinds of animals. Money. I'm gonna make $1 million doing that, right? That's not what people think when they come. They know it's gonna be hard, and so I get really irked when faculty say that too. And it's just like, okay, just like Eric said, give them a reason to come to class, but maybe when we're talking about assessments, we need to give them a reason to believe that this assessment is doing what that is doing them right. It's getting them where they want it.
I definitely, when I don't know how effective it is. And it's not like they really have a choice, but like, here's why I do the exams this way. I think this is important. The reason it's, and I tell them specifically, the reason it's not open note is because this is a learning opportunity and you're going to remember this stuff better because we've done it this way, but here's how you're going to prepare. Here's all the information. And so, there's a big part of that. And the other thing with the students who don't come to class, because I try to make my classes engaging and there's discussion, but some people still they don't learn that way. And they're, whatever, that's fine. It doesn't hurt my feelings anymore. It used to, like if we showed up and nobody was there, it probably would a little bit, but if I've got decent attendance and other people, like you have lives and you're making your choices and I get it. And I've gotten over that, but I get that feeling too of, showing up to an empty room or a nearly empty room when you've put a lot of effort into it, or you feel like you have, or you have, just maybe not the most effective effort. I don't know. It's tough. I see both sides of all of these things, but we do need to remember that our students are adults. They already have reasons to be here. They want to be here. We just got to help them out. And they'll meet us the rest of the way.
Yeah, I love, Bobby, what you said about like making assessments, make them understand why, right? Yeah. Because that also probably lowers the barrier to cheating if they're like, whatever, this doesn't matter.
Right.
For me being a vet, which is what we're here for.
Yeah. No, So we just talk about it openly. And like, here's how I'm going to do the exams. Here's why I do them this way. Here's, I don't expect you to get 100%. In fact, if you do, I might worry that you're cheating. But no, the idea is that I'm going to challenge you. I want you to think about things. And I talk a little bit about the brain science of how this is actually going to increase your memory. You're going to make stronger connections between things later, whether you get it right or wrong. You're actually going to be making those connections because I'm going to ask you to pull it from your brain. That act is going to tell your brain, hey, I guess this thing's important. We should probably try to remember this for next time. Like that. And they go, okay. I don't know how many of them it gets through to, but I think at least some of them it does. So just being explicit about like why we're doing the things we're doing.
You could add a multiple choice question to their final. Which of the things did the exams help you do? And then put some like cognitive things like, oh, that's I was doing retrieval practice.
That's right. That's fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you for engaging me in conversation and letting me rant a little bit and kind of get it out there. I think we're fairly unified in our sort of perception that cheating is a problem, but at the same time, it's a multifactorial problem. It's not just students, it's also faculty.
It's an us problem, not a them problem. Yeah. Like all of us.
I mean, there are also some bad people out there.
Yeah, there are. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
But generally, I fully
tiny
agree.
Minority.
It's a tiny minority. Fully agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And just because some people have cheated and some of them feel really bad about it, and it doesn't make them like your whole life is not ruined, right? Like, if there's an opportunity to kind of redirect and correct that, I think that's the other approach that I would advocate for.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Absolutely. So, thanks for letting me rant and have a conversation.
Of
with you.
course.
That was
Been
good.
As
fun.
always.
It was a good
Good
opportunity.
topic.
Good to hear everyone's perspectives and share stories. So yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for
definitely.
bringing it to us.
Thanks,
Yeah,
guys.
chat with you all, and yeah, we'll catch you all next time.